So welcome to the part two on the declarative pipeline that we have, been running through. So in the past video, we already saw that we actually started with the declarative pipeline. We saw the power of the declarative pipeline. We wrote a very simple declarative pipeline to take the code from a GitHub and then deploy them into a EC2 machine. It was a simple index.html file that we put across in our GitHub repository, and we basically deployed it. Now that being said, which is totally fine with on the Jenkins, but let's look into a more complicated declarative pipeline and a couple of things which is actually there inside a declarative pipeline as well. One is the first thing is about the status parameters and the post options that we are going to look into it. So when you run any job, the job has multiple status, right? So either it can succeed, which means hey, you run a job, it worked perfectly fine, and it basically gave you an option like hey, I am a success, right? The second part, a part it can be that if it failed, which means the status becomes a failure. So any step it failed, it becomes a failure. We have an unstable option, right? Which means if you are running through some of the parameters, if the build got succeeded but had some issues, right? Probably it failed some of the test cases, or it had some of the warnings as well. That becomes part of an unstable. About it is like when the build was manually or automatically aborted before it basically gets completed. Not built is no build was executed, which means it can be a disabled job or it can be a skipped stage if it is there, right? And finally there is an in progress, which means a build is currently running. Then comes across with a post. Now post is when you're writing an entire pipeline. At the very end you specify something called as a post. Now, post is one part where once the pipeline has been executed, what do you want to do around it? So, for example, your entire pipeline code got completed. Now, you probably want to clean up your entire workspace. You want to clean up your agent. You want to clean up some cleanup operations that you need to do, or some of the notification service that you want to probably send it across. So all these parameters, all these steps that you want to do, which is like once a pipeline has been completed, or probably even like some failure option as well. If you want to put all across, you can put it inside the post itself. uh, the post can also help you in triggering some other pipelines. So let's say you have two pipelines. You run the first pipeline, and then you are basically trying to trigger a second pipeline. Now this process is post can come across working with multiple pipelines. So let's say you have one pipeline to create an infrastructure. So let's say you wrote a Terraform code to create your infrastructure. So you run one pipeline to create the Terraform code, and once your entire infrastructure is ready, you run the other pipeline, which will basically take you to deploy the your actual application in the infrastructure that has been created. So that is another way of doing it. So that is like two pipelines. So post can come handy in multiple scenarios altogether. Then we have something called as the parameters. Now parameters are extremely important to work through. So when we talk about the declarative pipeline, we have multiple amount of parameters, which means different conditions. Like hey, I want to run this stage if the specific branch matches, or some of the condition basically matches, right? So you can match some of the conditions, you can match some environment specific variable, and then stuff like that, right? So those are basically called as the parameters. Okay. For example, you are creating a pipeline and you have multiple, obviously, the environment, like you have a staging, you have a development, you have a production, and you want to run some stages on a specific environment. So for example, hey, I wrote this stage, but this should run if it is a dev environment. If you are trying to run it in a staging only, then these sort of the stages to execute. Or if you're running in a production, you know these are the stage you should run. So this sort of if else condition kind of a statement, you can actually do it with the parameters itself, right? So parameters comes handy, helping you with multiple conditions to work around. So two things which becomes important is a when and the expressions in these cases. I'll modify the existing code in order to work with the parameters. Once this is done, we'll talk about some parallel pipelining. Parallel pipelining is like when you're running multiple stages in parallel. So these are the independent stages and running in a parallel. So let's say you have, two stages. One stage is taking, let's say, you're working with a microservice application. One of the microservices is taking, let's say, 5 minutes of time to basically do it around. So you have microservice one, right, which is taking, let's say, 5 minute time to build. Okay, like Docker build or whatever, like complications is there. The other one is microservice 2, which is like taking 5 minutes of time. I'm adding some more microservice 3 and 4, right, each taking 5 minutes of time. So technically, if you go with a sequential order one by one with all the build process, it will basically take 5 into 4, around 20 minutes of time to basically get it done. But if you decide to run it in a parallel mode, which means, hey, all these stages are going to run parallel all together. So let's say ms1, ms2, ms3, right, ms4. If you decide to run all the parallel, then this entire application will be done in 5.5 minutes or like 5 minutes or so. And this basically saves the timing. Also, it optimizes the resource usage as well, because then it will basically make the resource free for other pipeline, other teams to basically work with your Jenkins server. Okay, it's not a long running pipeline anymore. So this is something which helps you with the parallel pipelining. So I will be talking about the parallel pipelining as well. Okay, so without wasting time, let's go ahead and look for a demo. Now, for the demo purpose, we already had this. If you remember, like we were working around with these, pipeline previously. We'll be going ahead and modifying this particular pipeline for variety of purposes. Now, as we mentioned, that we'll be writing this entire code into our Visual Code Studio. Why? Because I like it. Okay, so let's go ahead and without wasting time, start writing it down. So in this code, what we are basically going to do, we are going to add some of the target branches. Okay, so for example, my target branch, I'm basically adding like, hey, my target branch is like a main branch. Okay, I'm basically creating a checklist that, hey, it should, my code should only get checked out when the branch is a specific target branch that I have specified. Okay, so what I can do, I can simply go to my stage and I'll use a when block. And this is where the parameters come into play. So I'm specifying a main branch like, hey, the branch is, and if that is where a .env, and target branch, if the branch is the target branch that I'm expecting, okay, then only then you are supposed to run this specific step, right, which is now for the simplicity purpose, I can also go ahead and modify this target branch. Okay, that is one thing. So what I'm basically specifying is that here, hey, look, if the target branch is something which I am expecting the target branch to be like a main branch or something, right, only then you go ahead and specify it, specify altogether. So this process, this stage will only run as I mentioned, if the build matches the main, right. Now this basically prevents the unnecessary cloning in other branches, like for example, you wrote a feature xyz branch, so that will basically be prevented altogether. Okay, so similarly, I'm just basically going to run through some of my EC2 instances. For example, right, let's say I basically want to do that, hey, it should only deploy, right, if the deploy to engineering. So I'm basically creating a environment called as deploy to nginx. Okay, and this is basically a flag. Now it's a to basically control my deployment process altogether. Okay, so whole point of having this the whole point of having this is that what I'm basically trying to do is I'm trying to control if my specific parameters is around certain value or not, right? If it is certain value, then I'm supposed to run anything. Okay, so I'm basically going to write certain multiple conditions, and if all the multiple conditions gets valid only, then I'm basically going to run specific stage. In this case, it's a simple value which is about deploying to a nginx, or probably to a copying to an nginx. Okay, so let's say I know this stage, right? So what I'll do that I want to just run this stage if, right, all of, which means all of means whatever the stage that I'm going to define, all of those steps are going to be valid, only then it can be. Now for example, hey, I'm basically going to write out an environment, right? Environment name is deploy to nginx. If the value to do this is true, only, and this is a kind of like a condition. uh, if you want to write, you can write multiple other stages like conditions similarly to basically make sure that it works. So my bad. Okay, now you can also write a not condition, okay, not expression. So for example, I'm just writing a not expression, and you specify expression tab to to mostly validate something, right? So for example, I have this parameter called as skip deploy. If it is false, right, then you basically have it. So for example, hey, I want to check it, return params, right, skip underscore deploy equal to true. So what this condition basically mean at this point is that you know this particular step is only going to get executed if this skip deploy, right, is false. If this is false, right, only then this condition is okay. If the environment name, right, is you know uh, and deploy to nginx environment variable is true, only then. So I am basically writing a not expression, right, and it's like a valid true expression by default, right? Now if you notice that I have not added a skip to deploy as of now. I've not added. If I wanted to add, I could have just so go ahead and add it. So let's go ahead and add that particular step. So for example, this I code it like because I have not added this skip deploy. So go ahead and add this into a parameter section. So just like in environment, I can also have like a parameter sections, and I'm going to define this boolean param, right? So boolean param name deploy. The default value of this would be false, as I mentioned, because we want it to be false. Description is this is going to be like skip easy to deployment. Okay, so this is like a parameters. Now you might be wondering why we are specifying this parameters, and what's basically the difference between a parameters and the environment altogether, right? Now remember, parameters is a it is about defining an input a user selects at a build time, while environment is defining variables used within the pipeline. So if you want to use a variables within the entire pipeline, you go ahead and deploy, write it down inside an environment. If you want to define an input which the user basically has to select at a build time, which means they can kind of plug in like a switch, right? Then you use it in a parameter. So for example, you specify yes, if you want to have some UI where the build is trigger, right? Where you can, the user basically have an option to basically select the specific value while running things around. That is where the parameters basically come down to it. Remember, one other thing is you cannot fetch the credentials from in the parameter section. So if you're working with the credentials, just like we saw with the credential, working with a credential like a such credential, that has to work with an environment as well. Now remember, also in the parameter section, the parameters in the parameter section, the trigger behavior will basically get paused until the user input is going to be there. So if you want some, hey, I want the input to be paused around, right, until unless I get a proper input, then in that case you'll basically have it. So I'm basically specifying a parameter to basically make sure that I get some sort of the value altogether. So I just have specified these specific value altogether to work around with it. Okay. Okay, that being said, let's go ahead and let's go ahead and run things around. Okay, so I'll go back, I'll just run it, I'll apply, I'll save it, right? And now I'll just go ahead and run this parameter. Okay, so my build got triggered, right? As you can see, my build is basically getting triggered. It's in the progress stage. Okay, so okay, now it's if you look into the pipeline step, you see like this got this specific code like got checked out, right? I mean, it basically got passed out. As you can see, I was talking about a step where you can simply go ahead and pass on the step altogether. So it basically passed on the checkout step, specifying, hey, the branch is actually a main branch or not, right? So if the target branch, as I mentioned, the target branch would run if only the build basically matches a main branch, for that particular matter, right? Okay, so that being said, this is what a generic pipeline looks like. Now coming back to the same pipeline, right? The same pipeline in this scenario, how are you basically going to work around with a post request altogether? So let's go ahead and add some post to it. Now remember, adding post basically means that we are basically trying to add some or the other values once the parameters, once the pipeline, the more all these stages have been completed. So once all these stages have been complete, we want to run some sort of the values, right? Which means, hey, the application got success. So you can, for example, as I mentioned, you can specify like if the success is there, we can probably write, hey, echo deployment is successful, right? Now you can also go ahead and specify some command to run. So for example, hey, I want to run some SSH agent, which will probably do like, hey, clear sudo rm minus rf and star, which is like I'm just clearing out everything inside my current directory. Okay, like all the index and HTML file and everything which was there, I'm basically clearing it out if the deployment is successful. If it's a failure, right, for example, if it's a failure, you can go ahead and specify, okay, you can have a failure option, which is, hey, deployment failed, deployment failed. So something on the other. Okay. So you obviously have an option to basically write out all the post method, um, you know, and probably also to send some notification in your Slack or Telegram or email, whatever you want to have. You can send some sort of notifications through the post process as well. So that being said, we can simply go ahead and execute this post parameter to get things done. So let's go ahead and run through this post. Again, a verification. Bad. I think I didn't copy it properly. Okay, so I am basically going to have save it, and now let's run with this. Now if you notice, we also have this build with parameters option. So do you want to skip a deployment? You have this parameter, right? You can select whether you want to make it a true or a false. Okay. This is only possible if we have some parameters to that. If you don't want to do it, by default, as I mentioned, it's a false that we have selected, so hence it is not checked in. So we can just simply go ahead and run the build processes again. Okay, so I think if we have successfully executed, right, I can see the post actions, which is there. Now you can see, like, deployment is successful because it got successful. It also went ahead and cleared everything around it, right? So post option got successful as well, and hence my total pipeline timing took around 16 seconds. Now let's go ahead and do some processes in order for us to do time thing, which is like around working around with the parallel concept. So parallel concept simply means that we are basically running through the parallel pipelines. As I mentioned, we can run multiple steps in a parallel to get our task done. For example, let's say, like, we have this option of hello, right? Code checkout and random commands. Okay, these are the three things which I think, like, are completely independent, which probably does not execute things around. So I can simply put all these three options as part of the parallel. So how do I put it? How do I make them a parallel? It's actually very easy to make all of these parallel. So first of all, I will basically cut all of these steps that I want to make a parallel, and instead what I am going to do, I am basically going to create a stage, right? Like parallel build. Okay, stage. And inside the stage, I am going to use this keyword called as parallel. Once I use a keyword called parallel, whatever the stage that I had, I'll just put it across all those stages inside it. Okay, so I am basically specifying. Okay, so now I have my steps, everything worked around with a parallel. So inside the parallel, I have three stages. One is a hello, another one is a code checkout, the other one is a stage random commands. Okay, so okay, now I just copy it, right? And I go back to my pipeline configuration code, my bad. So apply, save, and now let's go ahead and build with parameters, build, run it, and we'll look into the parallel pipeline. So we'll look into the pipeline, let the pipeline get complete. Okay, the pipeline got completed. We can simply go ahead and look into the pipeline overview option as well. And as you can see, like, these three pipeline basically got executed at the as part of the parallel build process. You can also look into the output, like hello, code checkout, and a random command. All the three got executed in the parallel. Obviously, ideally it would have taken, like, 0.34 seconds, 0.22 seconds, and 0.59 seconds to execute all the three of it. But technically, correspondingly, they took around 0.75 seconds to basically complete the pipeline. So as you can see, the parallel pipeline is optimizing the entire process. um, right now it's a very small process, so optimization does not look a lot. Okay, but when you're working with, as I mentioned, building up a Docker image with multiple microservices, that is where you'll see a significant amount of optimization to work around. Remember, when you're working with a parallel pipeline, you need to make sure that you have enough memory to execute it. Otherwise, that will create another sort of the problem altogether. Okay, so this is like a parallel pipeline option which is there. Okay, so let's go ahead. Finally, we'll once again do the same final process. I will go ahead and deploy, write out some more command qualification. So what is my educational qualification? Obviously I have done my PhD, right? So I will specify that my top qualification is PhD. Okay, I go back to my, where is that, right? Yeah, so I'll go back to my pipeline, and you can see in some time the pipeline number 8 will get executed, and that's it. We will have the entire pipeline being executed, and we'll see like the entire process being done across. um, Over here, I mean, obviously right now we are just waiting because it will take some time, a minute to the further cross process to run around, and then my process will basically get things. So that's it from the pipeline side, right? We'll look into the other processes of the Jenkins as soon as we work through it. So take care. Bye bye.